Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Night Writer podcast. I'm really excited to introduce filmmaker, screenwriter, and horror author, Chris Regan. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hiya, thanks very much.
We're going to be talking all about your new film, Paintball Massacre, and it got released on April 5th here in the UK.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just Monday just gone, yeah.
So before we get into it, I weirdly enough, I was checking Facebook and a Facebook memory popped up, and it was from 11 years ago, and it's me in a paintball outfit.
Oh, wow.
As fudge, holding a gun and just really not wanting to go in. And I'm just remembering that while I was preparing for this, and when I watched the trailer for your movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was just bringing back all of those memories, because that was the first and last time I ever went paintballing. It was
right.
It was for a friend's 18th, and it was not a great experience for me. I mean, paintballing for me is like a horror movie in itself. So it just kind of got me thinking, did you have a bad paintballing experience? Is that why you wrote this film?
I mean, I did. It wasn't sort of why I wrote it. It kind of, oh, my connection's bad. Let's just carry on and see what happens. So the producers approached me to write it, and they'd already had the idea to do a film about paintball, to do a horror film sort of around paintball, and I'd been paintballing probably once, I guess about a year prior to getting involved with the film, which was quite terrifying, to be honest. So instantly I was like, well, I can definitely make a horror film out of this, because it's a very odd experience. Because the one we went to, I think I've told this story on a couple of interviews, and I always feel bad because it was my friend's stag weekend. So I don't think I sort of feel like maybe I shouldn't keep saying how terrible it was. And we had a good time overall, but it was this. At the time, I remember we were all sort of, everyone had been drinking the night before, so we're all quite hungover. And I think it was with the best man, and he was driving us this place, and it was in the middle of I think we were sort of in Kent sort of area, and it was in the middle of nowhere, and we got lost on the way, so we were really late. And when we turned up, it was. I'm sure it was a very sort of reputable company, but it just didn't seem legit at all. It was this sort of down this like dirt road, and it was run by these two quite dodgy looking blokes, and the other team, we were all kind of creative, you know. My friend whose wedding it was, he's an actor, and so there were a lot of actors and creative type people, and we got out of the cars, and the rival team who'd been made to wait, so they were really angry. Just all looked like these ex-military, like giant sort of men. It was so terrifying. And then we just got slaughtered. It was horrible. It was so painful.
That was actually the same with us, because we walked with those petite 18-year-old girls walking into this building, and all we could see in the room, and this is the first time I've ever done anything like this, and all I could just see and hear are these people, these men on a stag weekend probably, all just shooting each other like crazy. They just went nuts.
Yeah.
And I basically turned to my friend and went, we're gonna die. We're gonna die.
Yes.
Literally all your characters actually says, like, we're gonna get murdered.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And it was things like, and a lot of this made it into the film. So we had to sign this. I don't know if you had to do this as well, but you had to sign disclaimers, because you're probably going to get injured. So to sign, and that was weird. And then it was the fact that we had to hand in our phones as well, which makes sense. But I was like, well, that's perfect for a horror film, because in horror films you're always trying to work out. It's one of the. I mean, it's sort of. It annoys me when it's done badly, but it's you're always trying to work out how to get rid of people's phones, because horror films don't work if people can just phone for help. So
in this kind of century, like day and age, not like
that's the thing. It never used to be a problem, and now it's this thing that every horror film has to address somehow, is why don't the phones work? So that was perfect. Well, you have to give your phones in. So so things like that really helped. But it was one of the things that we talked about quite a lot early on in the development was because my experience was that, and I kind of wrote it like that. I wrote it as this kind of really dodgy kind of off the beaten track paintball thing, and I know the producers, Joe and Brendan, they were really because well, partly for sort of from their own experience, but also for kind of they really wanted to get paintball fans on side, and so they were like, we can't portray it like that. It needs to all be sort of legit and proper, and you need to make it look like we've done some research sort of. So we kind of there were a few changes early on to the way I approached it. Yeah,
because like the health and safety bit, one of the main things is you have to wear those goggles, otherwise you can they scare you and say you can go blind if you don't wear the goggles.
Yeah.
And that actually, like, once I think I accidentally, because I wasn't actually doing anything in the paint when I went paintballing, I literally hid behind the thing and give my shells, because I'm just gonna wait until like we can go and have like alcohol pops or whatever. Like, I'm staying here, and I got told off by accidentally like taking it off, and one of the supervisors yelled at me and then like put it back on. But you don't think about these kind of things. But I suppose, yeah, like you said, you have to make it realistic. And was yours during the day as well?
It was during the day in the woods. Yeah.
Because most horror movies, I mean, a lot of them take place overnight. But when it happens during the day, I think there's just something quite different about that because it's more real. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons, I think it's easier to shoot during the day. Well, for us, I mean, maybe that's changed now, but that definitely it was. For being outside, it's sort of easier to shoot during the day. I'm not sure if it actually was in the end, but I think that was the idea of the paintball thing as well, was like, oh, we can film it all during the day. But yeah, I mean, when you think about Halloween, the first Halloween film, I think one of the creepy things about that was one of the first films that obviously the main action takes place at night, but there are those scenes when Michael Myers first turns up in the town and he's just turning up when the kids are going to school and stuff, and he's just there. And I think that was one of the first films to kind of put that in the daytime. And I think it's really interesting because you do sort of expect horror films to take place at night, but it's a different dynamic, I think.
Yeah. And also I was noticing there's loads of comedy in it as well, which I feel helps. Not so much like I mean, it does lighten it up, but it's something that I think, especially in British films and British horror movies, it works really, really well because it's just that dry humour.
Yeah, and I think as well with because it's quite a low budget film. Because I used to run a short film night in Brighton, and I found from that you could, if a film, because I'd show all kinds of different things, and if something was funny, it didn't matter what the quality was, like in terms of budget and how it looked and how good the acting was. But if it was funny, then the audience would kind of get on board. So I've always kind of leaned towards that a bit, because I think, especially when because when you're going in, we weren't going to have much money. It probably wasn't going to sort of look like a sort of big flashy movie. It was going to need to be able to pull people in straight away to go along with it. So I thought, well, at least if it's funny, then they'll kind of go along with it a bit more. And that wasn't, I mean, it came from the script, really, because it wasn't something we discussed early on. But also, I think to try and write a paintball horror film and have it totally serious would just be ridiculous. Really, I think it would be difficult to keep a straight face doing that. But I did try and set sort of quite strict rules with the comedy. Like, I was determined that the comedy would come from the characters and not from the situation. So it wouldn't be like the situation itself was real and was scary, but the way the characters reacted to it was where the comedy would come from, which I think is sort of something that happens in real life as well. Because I mean, I'm certainly someone who, when you're in a sort of bad situation or an emergency or something, I'm the first one to make a joke, or even as inappropriate as that might be sometimes. I'm like that. I'd still rather go to humour than as a defence thing, really. It's rather than addressing the horrible awfulness that whatever is happening. It's like, oh, let's just make a joke out of it and then we can cope as a coping mechanism, I suppose. And I think that's what a lot of people do. And I thought, well, that's where the comedy comes from. It's these people trying to cope with this situation. So they sort of they do make jokes, and they do kind of yeah, and the comedy comes from them rather than from anything forced, really.
Yeah, so it's very much like a character-driven thing.
Yeah, and that was and there was, I think that was that. The way I approached this really from the beginning was I really wanted to focus on the characters, and the characters are really important to me, was to make them all feel like individuals and feel like people that you could care about and could be interested in. And I think that's where that's what the humor played into as well, was that even though, because the characters aren't all likable necessarily, but they do all have these sort of moments, these humorous moments. So I think that you get along with them.
Yeah, rather than, because I think this is what I actually really liked, because most of these horror movies that I've noticed, like I've watched so many like slasher movies, they've all got that one kind of, or multiple like a-hole characters that just so, that's all they do, and then they're usually the first to go, and you're like, oh thank God he's gone, and you're like rooting for the killer. At some point you're just like, can you just get rid of it's like really winding me up.
And I think it's something that happened in the kind of 80s when the slasher film when the slasher genre kind of took off. I think there was a misunderstanding about what the appeal of the genre was, because I think there's definitely, I think a lot of films tried to do that on purpose. I think there was this idea that it was about the kills. So if it's about the killer killing someone in increasingly inventive ways, and that's the pleasure you're getting from it, then the characters have to be awful and annoying, and then you will want them to die. And I think that's what a lot of bad slasher films sort of do, but the really good ones, and I don't think, and there aren't really that many really good ones, like really good ones. And I think what they did was they make you care about the characters, and if you care about the characters, then you don't want them to get killed, and then that's when you get tension, because you care about what's going on, and that's how it works, I think.
Yeah, I think Scream was probably one of the first to, when you start to care about the characters, but then sometimes it gets to a point where you're like taking bets on who's going to be the first one to get picked off. You're like, oh, they're gone, because they have like a line they say, and just like, oh yeah, no, that person's gone for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, and I think with this as well, I went back to there was something I talked about with the director, because I knew he was a big Agatha Christie fan, so we kind of talked about Agatha Christie stories, and there's a real parallel between the Agatha Christie stories and slasher movies. If you look at And Them There Were None, which is probably the one I based most of this on, is that there's this real parallel between, that's a story where these characters turn up and they go to an island, and then they are killed off one by one, and then and whilst trying to figure out who's doing it. And I think that was the other thing I wanted to do with this, was I think a lot of slasher films struggle to give the characters something to do. So a lot of the, like, if you look at a lot of, especially the early Friday the 13th films, although any of those kind of summer camp films, is you end up with these characters you don't really care about, and there's like an hour of them sort of just messing around, sex and drugs, sort of
like
being
drunk
killed off,
pretending to be teenagers, running around, and then Jason, you're like, okay, just get rid of them.
And then one bite they get picked off, and then you get 20 minutes at the end where it's like, okay, now we're going to sort this out. And I sort of was like, so what are these characters going to do? And I think so that's why I had this idea of putting a mystery in it, which is not, I mean, it's not the first slasher film to do that. Others have done that before, but I thought if we make it like an Agatha Christie mystery, then there's what they're trying to do as they're trying to survive is also figure out what's happening to them and who's doing this.
Yeah, well, moving on from the victims to obviously the killers, in horror movies you have to have a good killer, and in this one, and obviously we're not going to give away any spoilers, but I'm just asking and just want to pick your brain in this one, and also in other stuff that you've written. Do your killers have do you have in your mind like their backstory and why they are doing what they're doing? So like, I think about all the horror movies that have all the best killers. For me, it would be the backstory, like Pinhead in Hellraiser. I think he's just like up there, like definitely, And then I guess with Michael Myers, when they made him her brother, but then there've been other movies where they've taken that out, and I just, yeah, I don't understand why they did that.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, yes, I think the answer is yes. I think if you don't, then the danger is it's sort of one dimensional. I think if the antagonists should always have their own kind of arc and their own story and their own plot that they're going through, and that's definitely the case. It's definitely the case here. It's always hard. I think what's hard is that the killer's not on screen that much, so it's. But I think you have to understand just what it is they're trying to do, because otherwise, yeah, I think otherwise you kind of get into a mess. So I definitely I definitely knew, like I definitely had a backstory for the killer. I know who it is, and then knew what they were trying to do, but it doesn't really ever come up. I mean, it does come up a bit in the film, but like a lot of that detail that I figured out never really comes across in the film. But I think if I hadn't figured it out, I mean, I think there's I mean, speaking of Michael Myers, I think there is a debate around in that first film, because in the remakes they've always given him more of a backstory and said, oh, he's this person, yeah, and in the sequels, but in the first one, it's like, is he? I remember having this argument with my dad once, like, is he just pure evil? Like, is he just a force of evil, not really even a character? Like, he's just sort of comes into this, like, I guess like the shark from Jaws, like he's just sort of there and killing people, which is why I think that film's fascinating, because I think what's scary about Halloween is the fact that it took place in this little town, and it's the scariest moment in that film for me is when she goes to the neighbor's house and knocks on the door and they don't open the door, and you think that's probably what would happen. Like, that sort of makes sense. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent there. But I think in that film, I do think it's a choice in that first one that Michael Myers kind of isn't, even though he does have a bit of backstory, but I do think he acts a bit like a sort of a force rather than a person. And I think that's a decision. But yeah, in Paintball Massacre, it's definitely a person that I had an idea of who that was.
Also, like, another villain is Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
But he apparently was based on a real life guy, or he was inspired by someone. Have you been inspired by any real life people?
No, not really. I mean, no. I think, and I think it's something that's being debated a lot at the moment, I think, because obviously true crime's become this massive thing with podcasts and Netflix series and stuff. I try and separate that, because I think, because I've always been a massive horror film fan, like since I was a kid. But to me, there's a sort of difference. Like, it's never real. Like, it never feels real. I think this is why, things like Hellraiser, that's definitely one of my favorites, but it's so sort of fantastical. Like, it's never, I mean, it's kind of gross and horrible, but it is sort of, it never sort of feels real. And I think when you get into things like the more kind of serial killer type ones, I guess Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, and things like that, which I still like, but it's like that starts to then get a bit uncomfortable, because it's like, well, it's not as fun when it's sort of about real sort of things. So I think, like, yeah, I mean, Paintball Massacre is not a sort of naturalistic kind of a realistic film, I think, in that respect. And I definitely didn't really refer to any, apart from I've referred to real life character experiences, but not. I wouldn't sort of look at, I guess, sort of real life murders or anything like that to kind of base it on, because I think it's I think for me it sort of has to be separate from reality. Otherwise you end up in some dark places in the internet.
Yeah, no, exactly, because then your mind starts going, because it's somewhere you can just kind of like unleash and just like be like, go, like when you're writing. Whereas if it's based on a real event, sometimes it's just like scary to think that that happened, and then you're trying to like turn it into something. Whereas
Well, yeah, I think it becomes a bit. Yeah. There's an uneasiness around that because it's like, well, yeah, where do you draw the line? I think once you start trying to make entertainment out of, like, I think that's what been a lot of the criticism. There was that Netflix series recently about the Cecil Hotel.
yeah, I was gonna do something like that because I've got so many opinions on that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
really interesting. I found the whole thing fascinating, but I watched it with my wife, and we ended up mostly debating over whether this was okay or not, because it sort of turns it into this entertainment when really the story was, well, this person was mentally ill and had a bit of a breakdown, and now we're watching a 4-part Netflix series about it, which sort of builds to that kind of revelation, really.
And the way that they were
And
kind of drip feeding it, it was almost like, oh, the hotel's haunted, or
yeah,
someone went after her, and then they had bring in all these web sleuths and stuff, and it's where is this going? And then that morbid guy, which was like, he seemed like a horror villain in itself when you're watching the documentary. It's just the way it was edited and the way that,
yeah.
and you just think, gosh.
It's really interesting, and I don't necessarily think it's bad. I think that is what I mean, you look at kind of, I think, murder mysteries. The murder mystery genre is just sort of full of that. It's all about kind of murder. But it's sort of, there's always been this kind of. But I guess for me, it's just interesting that there's this sort of line between entertainment and real life murder. And I think what's interesting, I think, being someone who's been into horror films, and I know so many people who would happily like watch true crime stuff and watch kind of murder mystery stuff, but would not watch something like Paintball Massacre. Would go, no, I wouldn't watch a horror film. And it's like, well, where's your line?
I
Like,
know, yeah. I noticed loads of people are like, oh no, I can't watch horror movies. Like, oh no, like I can't watch all that like blood and gore, but they'll happily watch like a 10-part true crime Netflix.
yeah,
What literally
yeah,
happens like in your neighborhood and sleep well at night,
yeah.
Like, yeah, I don't understand that either.
I
And
mean, I think there's a sort of innocence to horror films, really. I think that's what I quite like about them, is there's a sort of, for all the kind of, I mean, the blood and stuff, there is this kind of, quite often they're quite moral films, and the there is this kind of there are quite, the stories are often, when you take a step back, they're often these quite sweet stories about, I mean, I guess they're basically Red Riding Hood. They're basically, the girl goes into the woods and kills the monster. That's most of them. But yeah.
yeah, I mean, all fairy tales. I do. I've done loads of fairy tales on the podcast in season 1, and there's still loads to do. And even just researching them, they're all really dark. Their origin stories are dark, and yeah, Brothers Grimm kind of sugared it up, and then it got sugared more as it went on, and then it's a story for kids. But no, the real one, it has blood, it's got gore, it's got Cinderella sisters sawing their feet off into getting the shoe. I'm literally like, this is like a horror. It's like you did what you would see in one of these like horror movies, like Saw or something.
Yeah, and I think there's something like, where does that come from? There's always sort of been there, this sort of need to tell these awful stories. Like, and I think there's always and I think there's always been an appeal to that, really. But yeah,
I'm a huge fan of horror. I've always been, ever since I was a kid. And even just writing it, do you find that other people who kind of don't get it, do they sort of look at you and go, like, what is wrong with you? Like, what's going on in your head that you have to write about all this stuff? Because I get that a lot.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, I think, I think to a degree. I mean, I don't get, no, and I'm not sure anyone's ever said it to me directly, but I definitely get that impression sometimes. But
They're just getting it to you directly.
yeah, I mean, I think yeah, I think it's very. I find this in general, like with most people who like horror films, tend to be the nicest people. Like, I find sort of, the horror fans I know always tend to be really. I've ever been to like horror conventions. People are always really friendly, and I think there's this sort of, because I think this is part of it though, is I mean, maybe this is a bit too kind of broad, but I think there is this kind of sense that you kind of get the you all the kind of dark stuff you deal with in these films and kind of in these stories and music as well. I mean, I'd like, certainly with I've definitely had, like, I quite like black metal and things like that, and I've definitely had people say to me about that, like, what, like, just thinking about burning churches and stuff. Like, what's the feel of that? But it's sort of, it's
Oh,
separate. It's not literal, I suppose. It's not like, yeah. It's like I say, we don't watch the slasher film. Like, I don't watch the slasher film to see the guy killing the people in horrible ways. I don't particularly get a pleasure from that. I watch it because there's this. I've always found there's this weird kind of, like, this fantasy element. It's like there's something, horror films quite often take place in the real world, and they focus on characters that you recognize in situations that you recognize, like with Paintball Massacre, but then something out of the ordinary happens to them, and it just happens to be something horrible. But it's this sort of, it's almost this weird kind of, I guess it's what's become kind of urban fantasy now, but that kind of element to horror that I've always been interested in.
yeah, I think the horror genre, especially here, like it's sort of, it's like Marmite. You either love it or you hate it. I don't know if there's any in between. And I think there's also that kind of supernatural horror element as well, like the ghosts and the jump scares, which the Conjuring branch of the Conjuring series does really
Yeah.
fine. I mean, I even though you know it's just like, okay, it's a film, but you're in there, especially in the cinema, and you know there's going to be a big jump scare. When you're writing, I mean, what would you put that in there, or is that all up to the director to do?
It was, I think it's a combination of both. I'm trying to think. We had, there's a jump scare right at the beginning of Paintball Massacre, and it's not anything like, but it's like it's a fake. It was sort of tone setting. It was like a fake scare. Someone just knocks on a window, and I kept saying, when we were sort of working on the edit, I kept saying that that knocking on the window needs to be louder, because we need to make people jump. But it wasn't necessarily because I wanted, because it's a scary moment. It was just like, we've opened the film and it opens sort of quite small scale, and it's like, we need to show people that it's a horror film somehow. So I think that one I was quite insistent on. But yeah, I think a lot of the other stuff, it was down to I mean, a lot of the kills in the film, they were all kind of in the script in a version, but I kind of knew, again, not having much money, they were going to struggle to do it. There was limits to how much they'd be able to do, so I kind of left it quite open. Like, and we discussed most of the kills anyway before, as I was writing it. We kind of established what was possible and what wasn't. So yeah, so I kind of some of those kind of were either toned down or kind of, or in some cases made bigger. But yeah, that was more, I think that was more down to the director, because I think with jump scares, it's kind of, a lot of it's to do, actually, I think a lot of it does come down to the editing stage as well, because that's when you can really do it. I mean, obviously you have to prepare for that. You have to know, okay, this is the jump scare bit, but I think in terms of whether it's going to work or not, that comes down to the editing stage.
And then there's the music as well that sometimes could help add that effect.
Yeah, and we had a really good, really great composer on the film, but and that added so much to it in the end when his score was put on it. Yeah, that definitely, it all kind of builds up.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
So I mean, in your mind when you're writing it, do you have your own sort of horror music playing when you're doing it, like your own vision?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, I normally, I mean, I know loads of writers do this, but I normally do make a playlist of things. But it depends on the yeah, I was much remembering. It depends, because it depends on the mood of what you're doing. Because I had a lot of I think for Paintball Massacre, weirdly, I listened to a lot of the, well, it's not weird, I listened to a lot of the Star Trek 2 music because it's a really good score, and there were at one stage a lot of Star Trek references in it, which is to by the by. But I think for like, I know something I listen to if I need to get into the mood to write something particularly scary. There's one of the things I come back to a lot is the Hellraiser score. Actually, I listen to a lot It's really good. But the have you seen the film The Witch?
Yes, I have.
The score to that is really good, and it's not so much like, it's just really atmospheric and kind of like, in terms of just, like, I remember listening to that. It came onto my playlist while I was just washing up once, and I was immediately terrified just doing the dishes, just like that, because it just builds and builds, and so that's I find that a really good one to just sort of get in the mood for scary things happening. But yeah,
Yeah, you have to put yourself in that scenario, even if
yeah.
yeah. Have you been plugged into the horror scene for, I suppose the horror scene as in like the conventions and the festivals and stuff?
I mean, not really. I kind of I mean, this is the first horror film. Like, I'm a massive horror fan, but this is the first horror film I've written. Well, it's not the first one. It's the first one that's been produced. I mean, I've written others, but this, yeah, because I started in kind of low budget action films, and then yeah, that kind of developed from there. Really. So this was the first sort of, I wanted to do horror for a while, and this was the yeah, this is the first one, which is why I put, perhaps overthought it. I definitely put a lot more effort into it than the other stuff I've been doing, because it was like, I was like, this is my chance to do a horror film that's going to get produced. So yeah.
Did you film this before COVID?
Yes, it was filmed in a few years ago. It was 2018, I think, towards the end of 2018. And I wasn't involved in the shoot originally, because I kind of for, I mean, various reasons really. I mean, partly because they filmed over half term and I've got kids, but also it was like, I didn't really feel like I need. It was it was going to be complicated enough, and I thought I don't really need to be there as an extra person to sort of ferry around and stuff. So I thought of just left them to it. But
How were you on the set? I mean, I used to work in theatre like just before the pandemic, and I kind of thought,
okay.
should I turn up to rehearsals? Is it going to be really? Am I going to step on the director's toes? Like, do they want me there? Will the actors feel comfortable? Like, I don't know. But I just like,
Well, that's quite
going on, I suppose, because I'm fairly new. But I think, yeah, if it was on no location and I'd have to like travel to get there, I probably wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, theatre, I think, well, from what I understand, I've got a couple of friends who are playwrights, and I think theatre's sort of different. Well, my understanding was that in theatre they'd want you there for the rehearsals, but I think with film, it's sort of it's I think it's harder to be because the thing is, you don't have that rehearsal period. You're sort of straight in it, and you don't really have that kind of agility to kind of move to change things. Really, it's and I always kind of want, like, I'm not precious about dialogue particularly. I mean, obviously it's important, but I'm not precious about, you have to say every single word as it's written down on the page, and you kind of want people to be able to at least make it their own a bit. And I didn't want to be there, watching over everyone's shoulders, so they think, well, I can't change this. And also, I find the opposite happens, because I did go for a day when we did some reshoots, and I went for that day. And what happens when you're there is that the actors then either they ask sort of permission to change stuff, or they kind of put you on the spot and go, can you just quickly write something? Can you change this bit? And I don't like that either, because I'm not very good at being spontaneous and kind of coming up with stuff on the spot. So I think it's best. I find it with films, it's best to sort of stay away, because there's just there's so much stuff going on. To be ready to film with all the cameras and the lights and the makeup, and you've got everything kind of set. You just don't have that room to kind of just sort of start messing around with things. But we did a couple of read-throughs of it, which is something I think is really important.
Yeah, I always think the read-throughs are the I sometimes don't like them, because that's when the writer really is on the spot. But I know you need them. It's like a tough love situation where they can kill you and pick apart all your stuff. And
yeah, definitely, yeah. And I think that we did two. We did one with just friends, really, and then we did one with the cast just before they started filming, and that was I went to both of those, and it was really useful, because that's the closest you get to kind of seeing. It's almost closer. It's the closest you get to seeing the finished film, really, because then once they just start doing it, and it's all in little bits, but it's you get to hear the whole thing as it should sound, and that's really useful.
Yeah, it's quite thrilling when you hear all your cast is there and they're all reading your work. It's quite like, oh, it's me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you can definitely hear the bits that don't work so well. It's like, okay, right, yeah, I need to change that. Like, that sounded fine in my head, but no.
Yeah, exactly. There are things that sound really good in your head, and then you hear it out loud and you're like, oh no, actually, no, that sounded better in my head. I have to get rid of that. How many drafts did this take to get to the final?
I think it was about 6.
Okay.
But it was there were quite a lot of small rewrites. So in between those, like, the thing is, it moved quite quickly, and it's probably it took a while. Like I said, we filmed in 2018, so it took a while to get from there to it being released. But I think I mean, my memory's awful, but I think it was about I think I worked on it for about 6 months, and then they were shooting, and so there was always this kind of urgency to it that they wanted to get going, because it kind of came about through I think it came about through a project. The producer had another project that had fallen through, and so he just wanted to get something going fairly quickly. And also they had the basic story. So they came to me with the idea of, it's a school reunion and it's paintball and someone's killing them all, and they had a few of the deaths already, and so it was mostly about, and that that gave me the basic structure, and then it was mostly about filling in the characters and working out exactly what happened to who and when and things like that. So yeah, I don't know if sometimes I never really had to do like a page 1 rewrite draft. It was like, it was the first draft, and then it was a few big rewrites, but mostly it was sort of little changes here and there, and arguing over how many paintball rules we should include and things like that. So yeah.
Well, I heard through I don't know if this is a rumor or not, but I heard through the digital grapevine that this could be the first of a series, maybe.
Well, I hope so. I don't know. I think it depends how well it does now, really. But like, we talked about it, and I definitely there was sort of, yeah, an idea of doing a trilogy. I definitely like ran with that in my head. It was like, I could do that. But yeah, I think it's still early days. I think that was back in the time when we thought we'd have it finished by the end of sort of within a year. But that said, I mean, it has, of all the projects I've worked on, it's still, what's it been, 3 years, and that's still probably the quickest turnaround for a feature film that I've been involved in. It's not bad.
Yeah, all horror movies have to have sequels and stuff.
Yeah.
And finally, I think, what do you hope that people can your audience can get out of this?
I hope they get that they have fun with it, because I think that was the intention. It was that there should be, with the characters, there should be someone that you recognize, at least one or two of them that you recognize from life, because they're all sort of based on kind of the types of people you knew at school, and it's a lot about the reunion idea is kind of central to it. It's a lot of the film is about kind of people's experiences at secondary school and kind of remembering that and these unresolved issues and things like that. So but yeah, so I hope that people get something from that, but mostly to just sort of enjoy it, because I do think it sort of was supposed to be I suppose it sounds obvious, it's supposed to be fun, but it's supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be a laugh and a kind of Friday night like fun movie. So yeah.
Paintball Massacre. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I was going to ask really quickly, actually. If this wasn't sort of in the pandemic, is this a film that you would have released in like a horror festival?
Yeah, I think so. We had a couple lined up. Well, we screened in one in, I think, Argentina, but was obviously that was all over. It was all online in the end, and we did have one in the States that it was in, but they got cancelled. So I think, yeah, I think ideally it would have done festivals, but and that's sort of that's yeah. This is it's I can't complain really, because it was finished before the pandemic, and it came out, and we've kind of I think even that's been a bit of a miracle really, because I think it was quite hard to actually convince people to get on board with it, because the film industry at the moment is so kind of up in the air. So yeah, so I can't really complain, but it's yeah, we sort of our sort of big cast and crew screening was a very surreal experience, because it was kind of I mean, it was last year, and it was kind of like yeah, only a few of us went, and we just went to the screening room in London, and all wearing masks and things, and it was just very, very odd. But yeah, so I was sort of a bit gutted we missed out on that kind of big kind of, oh, well done us kind of screening, but still it came out, so that's the main thing.
Because I would have definitely gone and seen it in a festival as well. I'm a huge horror movie, like Fright Fest and stuff. I think it's the one at Cineworld in Leicester Square. I know they have.
Yes, yeah.
And you get passes, and you can go in, and everyone's like running around talking about horror movies, and it's just that's just
yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, Fright Fest is great. Yeah, I would have loved to have been on there.
Yeah. So final question. Your favorite horror movie villain of all time?
Okay. It probably is Pinhead from Hellraiser. Like, I think I think there's just something that's so what I still love about that film is it's so weird, and it kind of like, I think it still holds up, because it keeps so much from the audience. And like, in the first one, the Pinhead and the Cenobites, they're hardly even in it. They're in it for about, I think, 7 minutes or something. They're on screen, and yet they're so. And so all you have are questions. When you see that film for the first time, you just have questions like, who are these people? What are they doing? Like, what's this about? And I think it's that mystery that kind of it's sort of that's scarier than kind of, and as the films go on, you kind of find out more about them. I just sort of don't want that. I prefer the kind of mystery. I worked with Doug Bradley, who played Pinhead on my first film. He narrated that film, so I had a day where I was in the kind of recording studio with him. So that was really good. And then in Paintball Massacre, the guy who plays the bartender, I think he's in the trailer. The guy who plays the bartender is Nicholas Vince, who played the chattering Cenobite in Hellraiser. So I've worked with 2 Cenobites so far.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a promotion for Hellraiser as well.
yeah, basically. But
old one, not the remake, the original.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll put all the links in the description as well.
Sure.
So Paintball Massacre is out now. You can download it, and you can get it on Amazon. It's on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, it's on DVD as well.
DVD as well. Thank you so much, Chris.
No problem. Thanks very much.
Bye, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.